Okay, in this video, we're going to go over terms for cash discounts. So this is specifically for cash discounts. Previously, we've talked about trade discounts. Then we also have chain discounts where we have a series of discounts. And then we talk about cash discounts. Cash discounts are mainly used to get people to pay their bill early. So a lot of times companies will say if you pay your bill within 20 days or 15 days of your invoice date, we'll give you an additional 2% off. So it's a way to throw out a carrot to get people to make sure they pay their bills. Now, the symbols that you see on the invoice to indicate that there's a cash discount, here's an example. If you see 210, that 2 means you get an additional 2% discount on top of a possible trade discount if you pay within 10 days of the invoice date. So the N30, that N means you're going to pay the net price basically in full. If you miss the discount period, you have to pay in full by 30 days of the invoice date. So this part right here means you pay in full if you've missed the discount period by 30 days of the invoice date. Okay, so if we look at an example, let's say the invoice date is January 12th. So if we look at a timeline, January 12th will be our starting point. And if we pay within 10 days, we'll get a 2% discount. So 10 days from January 12th would be January 22nd. So if we pay anywhere in this time frame right here, we would get a 2% discount. However, if we miss this deadline of January 22nd, then we have to pay within 30 days of January 12th. So 30 days from January 12th would be February 11th. And so if we miss this deadline January 22nd, we would have to pay in full by February 11th. So here's our timeline. As an example, if we say the invoice date is January 12th. So we have the discount period, which would be from January 12th to January 22nd. And the credit period would be from January 12th to February 11th. And if we miss that deadline of January 22nd, we have to pay in full by February 11th. Now, if I add the letters onto our terminology here, ROG means receipt of goods. And the only difference between this example and the previous example, instead of the discount period starting on the invoice date, you start from the day that the goods are received. So this means we get a 3% discount if we pay within 10 days of the receipt of goods. And if we don't pay within 10 days and we missed the discount period, we have to pay by 30 days of the date the goods are received. So here's an example of a timeline again. Let's say our invoice date is April 2nd. So this is the invoice date. Let's say we receive the goods on April 5th. So if you look at the previous example, when we made our timeline, we started on the invoice date January 12th. But because these terms say ROG, that means when we make our timeline for our discount and credit period, the starting point is going to be the day that we receive the goods. So it's going to start on April 5th, not on April 2nd. And now the same rules apply. We get a 3% discount if we pay within 10 days of April 5th. Well, 10 days of April 5th would be April 15th. So if we pay in this time frame right here, we would get an extra 3% discount. Now, if we miss the deadline of April 15th, we have to pay within 30 days of April 5th. So 30 days of April 5th would be May 5th. And so if I pay somewhere on this time frame, from April 15th to May 5th, I'm going to have to pay in full because I've missed the deadline of the 3% extra discount. So here is our timeline for this example. And so the only difference between this example and the previous example is the letters ROG, and it just means that the point in which we start the discount period, that would start on the day that the goods are received. So we have the discount period, which would be April 5th to April 15th. And then if we miss that deadline, the credit period ends on May 5th. Now, if we see EOM, this is a whole different set of rules. EON stands for end of month rules. And what that means is that if I see that I get a 1% discount in this example, that means if the invoice date is on or before the 25th of the month, so let's say the invoice date says April 3rd. The 3rd is definitely on or before the 25th. So what would happen is, if you have end of month rules, you get a 1% discount if paid by the 10th day of the next month. So if we look at this in terms of a timeline, using the example that the invoice date says April 3rd, we would start the discount period on April 3rd. We would get an extra 1% discount if it's paid before the 10th day of the next month. The 10th day of the next month would be May 10th. Now this is for any month, as long as the date of the invoice is on or before the 25th. So even if I change the invoice date from April 3rd to say April 10th, I would still have until the 10th day of the next month because it's on or before the 25th. Then, if you miss that discount period, so this is the discount period where you get the extra 1% off. If you miss the discount period, you have to pay by the 30th of that month. And again, that holds true for any month. As long as the date of the invoice is on or before the 25th, you go to the 10th day of the next month. That would be the end of the discount period. And then the end of the credit period would be the 30th of that month. So if I pay anywhere within this time frame, I would pay in full. So if we're using the end of month rules, but the invoice date is after the 25th of the month, so let's say April 27th. The 27th is after the 25th. So the only difference between this and the previous example, instead of going out to the 10th day of the first month or the next month, you go out the 10th day of the second month. So when I make my timeline, so you go out, let me write this down, so you get a 1% discount if paid by the 10th day of the second month out. Then you have to pay in full by the 30th of that month if you miss the discount period. So looking at the timeline, we would start on April 27th. Then, because the date is the 27th, which is after the 25th, we would go out 2 months on the 10th day. So the next month would be May. The month after that would be June. So my discount period would end on the 10th day of the second month, which would be June. So if I pay anywhere between April 27th and June 10th, that's going to be my discount period. That's when I get the extra 1%. Now, I have to pay in full by the 30th of that month. So if I miss that deadline of June 10th, I have to pay in full by the 30th. Okay, let's go through these examples. Okay, so the first example says the invoice is on June 11th. The date that the goods are received is June 25th. The terms are 110 net 30. So that means if I make my timeline, so unless it says ROG, I'm going to start the day of the invoice. So I'm going to start my timeline at June 11th. If I pay within 10 days of June 11th, I'm going to get an additional 1% off. And I'm getting that information from here, where I just underline. I have a 1% discount if I pay within 10 days of the invoice date. So 10 days from the invoice date would be June 21st. So that would give me a 1% discount if I pay between June 11th and June 21st. I have to pay in full within 30 days of the invoice date. So 30 days from the invoice date, June 11th, would be July 11th. So I would have to pay in full by July 11th. So the last day, if I look at this column, the last day of the discount period would be June 21st. That would be the last day I can get a discount. And the last day I would have to pay in full would be July 11th. The next example says the invoice date is November 28th. The date that the goods are received is December 15th. and the terms are 2/10 end of month. Because it doesn't say ROG, I know I'm going to start on my invoice date. So if I start on the invoice date, I'm going to start at November 28th. Now, it does say end of month rule, so that means if it's on or before the 25th, I go to the 10th day, 1 month. If it's after the 25th, then I go out 2 months to the 10th day for my discount period. Since the invoice date says November 28th, that means I have to go out 2 months on the 10th day. So I'm going to go to December and then January. So January on the 10th day. So I'm going to get an additional 2% discount, and I get that from right here using the end of month rules. So here's my discount period. Now I have to pay in full by the 30th of that month. So the end of my discount period would be January 10th. The end of my credit period, which I would have to pay in full by, is January 30th. Okay, the next example does say ROG, so that means we have to start the discount period on the date that the goods were received. So when I make my timeline, I'm going to start it on June 9th because that's when the goods were received. Now this is telling me I get a 3% discount if I pay within 10 days. So if I pay by June 19th, I'm going to get a 3% discount. So here's my discount period. Now, if I pay within 30 days of June 9th, then I have to pay in full if I miss that June 19th cutoff date. So 30 days from June 9th would be July 9th. So I would have to pay in full by July 9th if I miss my discount period. So the end of my discount period, the last day I can get a discount would be June 19th. And if I miss that discount period, I would have to pay in full by July 9th. In the next example, it doesn't have ROG, so I don't have to worry about starting my timeline on the date when the goods are received. It doesn't have end of month rules, so I'm just going to make a timeline without any of those special considerations. So I'm going to start on April 19th. I start on the invoice date unless it says ROG, then I start on the receipt of goods date. Now it says if I pay within 10 days of the invoice date, I get a 2% discount. So 10 days from April 19th is April 29th. So if I pay from April 19th to April 29th, I'm going to get a 2% discount. That's this right here. Then this tells me if I pay within 30 days of April 19th, then I would get a 1% discount. So 30 days from April 19th would be May 19th. And I would get a 1% on that period. So from here to here, I would get a 2% discount. And if I pay from April 29th to May 19th, I would get a 1% discount if I pay in that time frame. Then if I pay after May 19th, I would have to pay in full. And it says here that I would pay in full by 60 days after April 19th. That would be June 18th. So the last date that I can get some kind of a discount would be May 19th. So this is the end of my discount period. And the last date that I can pay in full, or the last date that I have to pay in full if I miss the discount period, would be June 18th. Okay, last example. This has end of month rules. It's not ROG, so I'm going to start from the invoice date. So when I make my timeline, I'm going to start at June 20th. Now the 20th is before the 25th, so that means I'm only going to go to the 10th day of 1 month out. So I'm going to go to July 10th, and this tells me I would get a 3% discount if I pay before the 10th day of the next month. I have to pay in full by the 30th day of that month because it's end of month rules. So I would have to pay in full after July 10th. So here's my discount period. So the last day I can get a discount would be July 10th. And I would have to pay in full by July 30th.